Welcome back to a new episode of 6-1 Forward. Today, we have a special guest with us, Allison Russo, former minority leader at the Ohio House of Representatives. Allison, thank you so much for being here. It's exciting to be sitting across from you today, especially after making some news in June about stepping away, taking the summer. I think you have some news to share.
Yeah, so at the beginning of June, I announced that I was going to step down from my leadership position as the House Minority Leader, still completing my term in the State House as a state representative. But to decide what I want to do next, I am term limited. We have term limits in the state of Ohio for our legislative offices. And I wanted to give that new leadership team the opportunity to go ahead and make that transition as I decided what to do. And so I have announced that I'm running for Ohio Secretary of State.
Oh my gosh, I know that it was a process to get to this point. A lot of thought and care put into this decision. I'm really excited for you, and thank you for sharing it here.
Yeah, thank you.
When we talk about the Secretary of State, and I'd like to talk about what that office is, but before we do so, I think it'd be great for people to hear how you got to this point.
Yeah. So I have served in the legislature since 2019, January of 2019. I was first elected in 2018. Actually, being a state legislator is my first elected office. I think people think I've been in politics for a long time, but I ran for the first time in 2018. Because Ohio has term limits, you're limited for 4 terms or 8 years. I have to make a decision. Am I going to continue to serve or step back and go back into private life? And there are pros and cons to both. Certainly, I'm a mom of 3 kids, and I love being with my family, but I also love serving the people of Ohio and the public, and knowing that there's so much more to do, and there's so much to, I think, make sure that we are in a position as a state to be strong moving forward. I've had a front row seat in the legislature of some of the damaging policy, but specifically as it relates to Secretary of State, the importance of making sure that every single voter has access to the ballot and can fully use their voice to decide their elected representation. So when I thought about where I feel like the most impact can happen, it is in that Secretary of State role, which runs all of our elections, manages those elections, has a huge role to play in, for example, statewide ballot initiatives. We're very lucky here in the state of Ohio that we have access to direct democracy. Citizens can go collect signatures, put issues forward. And unfortunately, what we've seen with the Secretary of State's office over the last, 8 years or more, actually much longer than that, is a real making that office very political, and using a heavy hand to basically, I think, diminish the power and the voices of people. And we've seen that in terms of people's access to the ballot and making it much more difficult, for example, to register to vote, to show up and vote. And then we saw it, I think, last year, and even the year before, when we had statewide initiatives like reproductive rights on the ballot, the redistricting reforms for the citizen-led commission, the Secretary of State's office really using the power of that office to manipulate both what the language was when voters go into the ballot box, to tip the scales to what was politically advantageous for the party in power. And I think that's wrong. Yeah. I think voting is a right. I always say voting is a right. It is not a privilege. Right. And, we have had incredible secretaries of state. Actually, former Senator Sherrod Brown was a former Secretary of State. Now Justice Jennifer Brunner was also a former Secretary of State. And, their legacy was making sure that people had full access to their voting rights. And, as we look at the state of democracy right now, being able for people to have that power. That's right. And that right has never been more important.
What led you to that election, the very first one that you ran for?
Yeah. So it's funny because I meet a lot of people in this work and serve with many people who they know from a very early age that they want to be in politics, they want to be in elected office. That was not me. Now if you ask my mother, she will say something different. She will say, I always knew that you were going to, be in elected office, but that was not a desire that I held. My work prior, for more than 2 decades prior to running for office, was in policy. I have a background in healthcare policy and public health. Working in advising roles for decision makers for health systems. And it was very unglamorous. I always say good or bad policy. My job was to help make sure it got implemented, to look at its impacts. But like many people, 2016, I think changed me. I always say, I was a very engaged voter, always participated in elections, understood my ballot and the importance of voting. But I was on the sidelines. And I think 2016 in particular energized many people, especially women,
That's right.
To get off the sidelines. And, I always tell the story. In 2016, my third daughter was a newborn. She was 6 weeks old at the time. And, so I stayed up and watched that election like a lot of people. And I was very disappointed, to say the least, in the results. And I remember looking at my daughter and thinking, I will never be on the sidelines again. And, within the next year, I started to become more engaged in the political process. People started to say things like, maybe you should run for office. And I was like, no, that's crazy. I'm raising 3 kids. I've got a very busy career. That's not my role. And then, that shifted. Right. And I thought, yeah, I could do this. And I quietly started doing candidate training, just to understand what it was about online. There were a lot of resources at the time for women, especially to run for office. Because I'm a big believer in you never know what opportunities will come before you, but be prepared.
That's right.
To take advantage of them when they come. And completely unbeknownst to me, very quickly, the incumbent in the state legislative seat decided he was going to run for judge. And so it was going to be an open seat. And I was not at all thinking that I would run that quickly in 2018. I thought maybe 2020 or later. And, but then I, had a conversation with my husband and a few others. And I said, well, if I don't do it now, when am I going to do it? And it was terrifying because I had no idea what I was doing. But I got together with a really good friend of mine, a mom friend. I had a couple of people, was smart enough to know what I didn't know and to get some really smart people around me. And, that first race, I had a primary. It was a 3-way primary. It was going to be an open seat. It was a Republican-held seat. I'm a Democrat. And, we just got out there and knocked on doors. That's what we did. We got out, we talked to voters, my mom friend and I, with our kids and me pushing my daughter around in her stroller, knocked on voters, talked to voters. We ran an incredible primary campaign. I won that pretty handily. The other 2 women who ran in that primary, they were incredible. And we ran a very positive campaign. And then I realized, it wasn't until after that I realized, this is one of the most competitive state legislative seats and targeted seats in the entire state, So it's a good thing probably I didn't know that beforehand because I might not have decided to run. But I was in it then, and, we just continued to run a really hard campaign, and I worked my tail off and flipped that seat and won.
Were you at the time, I can't imagine making a decision to run for office, but for a state office versus a school board or versus something that would have been a little bit smaller. As you look back on that, and other people are considering what they should be doing, possibly running for office, what would your advice be about taking a leap?
Yeah. Well, the reason that I wanted to run initially is around healthcare, because at the time, what was happening nationally, this was the beginning of 2017, at the national level and at the state level, there were many attempts to undermine the Affordable Care Act, Medicaid, much like what we're seeing now, right? This was the first attempt to take healthcare away from people. And because of my background, I knew that the place where I could be most effective was actually in a state legislature. So that's why I narrowed in on that as opposed to another office. But, everyone, I think you have to understand what is your why. I work with a lot of people in terms of recruitment to run for office, many women in particular to run for office. And I think, especially for women, we're always trying to check these boxes of qualifications. And I always say, you are qualified to run for office. The intent of having elected leaders is to have people that represent the public.
Right.
In all forms, all backgrounds. And as women, I think we tend to second guess ourselves and fall into this poser syndrome. And, but people have to understand what their why is and where they think they can be most effective. And what motivates people to step up and serve their community is different. And so what makes the most sense, is different for everyone.
When I hear you talk about women and the passion around that, I want to speak to and give an example, which is, I met you when you were on an SMPS panel and I was moderating it. And that was months and months and months before this most previous election. And after the election, I myself, surrounded by other women who were concerned about what was happening in 2025. And I realized that we were talking about the same things, but we were in an echo chamber and we didn't know what to do. And so late one night, I reached out to your office to say, I know this group of women and we're concerned and we don't know what to do and we're scared. And we really would love if Allison would come and speak to us. And I hit send. And I remember waking up the next day going, I should not have done that. What did I do? That seemed like such a great idea at the time. That next day, it must have been a couple of hours into the day, I got a response from your office. And without hesitation, it was yes. And with no questions asked, without any fundraising component to it. And leading up to that day that we all gathered and you came, I shared who was going to be there, but you had no idea what you were walking into. And you walked in ready to listen to a group of women who desperately needed it at that moment and still do. And with the best intention. And I can't say how much that meant to us then, and how I think there are a lot of people who don't feel like they can reach out to an elected official and say, will you do? Can you do? Yeah. And I think it speaks to the genuineness and the authenticity of who you are and what you're saying even right in this moment. So thank you for that.
Well, thank you. Thank you for reaching out to the office and asking me. As someone who has led other elected leaders, because that's my job as the minority leader, I lead the House Democratic Caucus and have led it. I'm always asked with new members to come in and give, sage wisdom and direction. And the first thing that I start with is a big portion of this job when you are elected to serve a community is showing up.
That's right.
You have to show up. And it starts with that. And it doesn't mean that you have all of the answers, that you know immediately what the action is going to be, but you need to show up. And the best quality that you can display when you show up is to listen and hear what people have to say. I learn so much when I listen to my constituents or others, when I'm going around the state or within my district, because I know I don't have all the answers. And, some of the best ideas that I've had for legislation or other things have come from me showing up and people sharing with me what they think or what their issue is. or us working, together to figure out what the solution might be. And so, I think that is, I think that's one of the strengths women especially bring to this work.
Absolutely.
As we tend to be great listeners and coalition builders. So I start with that.
You talk about your mom having seen this in you from a very early age. I was wondering if you could share a little bit about what your relationship and growing up, what that was like for you.
Yeah. So my mom is a huge influence in who I am and the issues that I care most passionately about. When you look at my work, I've focused a lot on working families, caregiving, making sure that women especially have a path to economic stability and prosperity, addressing things like childhood poverty. So I grew up, my mother, she married very young at 16, didn't graduate high school. She got her GED, had me by the time she was 19.
Where did you grow up?
I grew up I am not an Ohio native, actually grew up in Mississippi. So the little bit of Southern accent, people think that it's Southern Ohio. It is not, it's much further south. So I'm a transplant. And then, she found herself at 21. She had 2 daughters because my sister and I are 15 months apart. Oh. Single, limited high school GED education, no real job. I mean, other than she cleaned houses, she worked at a gas station as a clerk. And then she got the opportunity to join an apprenticeship program as a union carpenter.
That's wild.
So, here's my mother. This is, the late 1970s, early 80s. She is a woman working in the building trades on a construction site, raising 2 little girls. And, so I gained a deep appreciation, especially for the role of unions, in giving people a pathway to the middle class. And for the first time, we had, she had a stable income. We had access to healthcare,
right.
Those kinds of benefits. I mean, it was tough work. And like many people in the building trades, she'd have to go on and off of unemployment because of the cyclical, seasonal nature of the work. But that opened doors for her because she then, slowly was going to community college and, taking classes here and there. She did eventually remarry my stepfather, but did not finish her college degree until after I had graduated from college. And she made it a point for both my sister and I and my brother eventually, that education is such a pathway to opportunity. We were public school kids. And, that opened so many doors for us. She eventually got her college degree after I got my college degree, and then went on and got her doctoral degree, her PhD.
Really?
Later in life. And 2 years ago, retired from a university. And
what a story.
She's just an incredible story of, strength and grit. I think showed me and my sister and eventually my brother, the importance of hard work, that, life is not easy, but you just keep going and you work through it.
Wow. What a story.
Yeah.
Will she be potentially joining you on the campaign trail?
Oh, yeah. So my mom likes to cut for every single one of my races. My mom comes in the last week, mostly to help me with my kids, but she comes in the last week and she knocks on doors with me.
That's awesome.
I always love my very last canvassing, which is when you go and knock on doors. My last canvassing shift, she is always with me walking door to door.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
So let's talk about what we can expect to see or what you'll be doing between now and the election.
Yeah.
What does that look like for you?
Well, a lot of it is showing up.
Yeah.
It's showing up all across the state. Ohio has 88 counties.
That's right.
And it's being in every place. I feel very strongly that we have to show up everywhere. and not ignore communities, even those communities that we think are going to be with us. That is a huge mistake.
It is.
We should show up and be talking to those folks in those communities and listening to them. We have a lot of work, I think, as Democrats in rural areas in particular. I ran in a special election for Congress in 2021. And it was a long shot race, a very highly gerrymandered congressional district. And but it covered 13 counties. And I loved it because I grew up in a very rural area and community. And I was, I know the importance of going and talking to people. And even though, Republican, Democrat, a lot of people don't even feel or consider themselves either party. But listening to people and asking what's important. And I'll never forget, this woman in this very small town, she owned a small restaurant that we were visiting and, probably voted the opposite party of me. Sure. And I said, what do you care about? And she said, you know what, at the end of the day, I just want to feel like someone, whether they're in Washington or whoever, that they are fighting for me.
That's right.
And that stuck with me. And people don't know that if you don't show up. And it's very easy to create a narrative about who you are or what your party is if you don't show up and have those conversations and meet people where they are.
As you talk about where you plan to show up, there are a lot of people who are looking for their call to action and where they need to show up. As you're thinking about the Democratic Party in Ohio and those who want to be involved, where should they go first? How should they be involved with you or in general?
Yeah, I wish there was an easy answer for this. I will say, I think we are at a moment in time in this country where there is so much happening. People are being inundated with crisis after crisis, right? Every time you turn on the news, and it can be extremely overwhelming. And so I tell people, pick something, an issue, a candidate, whatever it is that you feel most passionate about and where you think you can have your small bit of difference, because all of those small things add up to much bigger things. But if you try to do it all, it's not going to work and you're going to be extremely overwhelmed. So pick that small thing. And if that's a candidate that you feel really passionately about, volunteer with that campaign. Don't expect a party to come in and save us or create direction. That's not going to happen. It never has been, because party, at least the Democratic Party, we are a big tent party, and we are a party that should be a bottom-up party. We are driven by actions and organizing and grassroots initiatives. And so find that in your community, find that with your candidate, find that for your issue, and work towards that. And I think that's what makes the difference.
I had an aha moment the evening that we were all together. And I said something along the lines of, Allison, we've been fighting. It feels like we have been fighting for a very long time. And at what point can we just maybe not fight this hard? And I remember your response was, we may always have to fight.
That's right.
And it was a moment for me that I don't know why that had not occurred to me, that the fight is never really over.
Nope.
And the commitment and what needs to be done and the work in getting people registered to vote and getting people to show up to vote. And so I thank you for that, because it's a reminder that we can't be complicit.
That's
and
right.
there's never a time to
You can never
pause.
take your foot off the gas pedal. That doesn't mean that you can't step back and take a break and let other people come in.
That's right.
And help you with that work. But the work never stops, and it won't. I mean, democracy is a verb.
That's right. That's right.
And you have to constantly keep working. I mean, that's the wonderful thing about this country. And I believe deeply in this country and in this state. We can always be better, and we should always be striving to be better and to do better. But that's always going to require work. That's right. And you're always going to hit resistance in that work. And it's exhausting. And it's okay to step back and take a break. I mean, I stepped back for a month this summer. I needed to take a break. I also had to send a kid off to college, but and that's okay. But we should never expect that we're just going to get to this moment of, zen and everything's going to be perfect in utopia. That's not going to happen.
That's not it. When we think about the Secretary of State's office, you talked about some of the core responsibilities. Do you have a vision in mind? Are you working towards what your vision will be? Are there core components to the office that you really want to address or prioritize?
Yeah, I want people to feel like, number one, that office is nonpartisan.
That's right.
That it is focused exclusively and there are many responsibilities. I mean, the Secretary of State also has a component that works with, registering our businesses and in the state, that piece. And so we should make sure that is efficient and accessible. We want to welcome all new businesses and make sure that they don't encounter a lot of red tape in that process. But in terms of, access to the ballot box and voting and support for our boards of elections and our election workers, there have been a tremendous number of challenges over the last several years. And there is a lot of work to do, I think, to both restore the public's faith in the integrity of our elections, but also to restore faith in people feeling like their vote matters, right? And that, they're not going to show up and vote and the vote is going to be manipulated because they're in a highly gerrymandered congressional district, or they voted, to support a ballot initiative. But as soon as, the legislature gets a hold of the law, cannabis, for example, which adult use cannabis, that they're going to change it because, the voters didn't really understand what they were voting for. Or that when they show up in the ballot box and they vote on a ballot initiative, a citizen-led ballot initiative, that the language has not been manipulated to be something that it's not. And so that is the work that we need to do to restore faith in the vote, in our democracy, and in the power. At the end of the day, this is about restoring power back to where it belongs, and that is with people.
That's awesome. I usually end every single episode asking a question around how you would define or describe the Columbus way. But for the very first time, we're going to change that.
Okay.
And how would you describe the Ohio way?
Oh, you know what I love about Ohio and its history, and I think where it will go into the future, and that is this undying spirit of innovation.
Wow. And,
we have this incredible history of innovation in the state, whether it's, flight, manufacturing. It's no accident that we are the heart of it all, that we have generated more presidents in this country. And I want to see that continue. Absolutely. And we've fallen backwards in the last couple of decades. Right. And we have the bones are good. The history is there and it's so good. And I want to make sure that we continue to be the heart of innovation in this country.
I love that. Thank you so much for joining today. We will be following along as you begin your campaign and up to the next election. Thank you, Allison.
Thanks.